Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax. A strange land. Deep within the heart of the forest, there existed a place shrouded in darkness and whispered legends. It was a place few dare to speak of. Its name carried with it the weight of ancient terror. The Strange Land, as the locals called it, was a patch of wilderness that stretched farther than anyone cared to venture. There the trees grew twisted and gnarled, as if they had been contorted by some unseen force. The air was thick, heavy with an unnatural weight, and the silence was unsettling. It was as if the very land itself held its breath, waiting. I had heard the stories all my life. The tales of ancient powers hidden deep within the forest, of dark rituals performed by long-forgotten civilizations, and of the malevolent forces that slumbered, awaiting the right moment to awaken. At the edge of our small, quiet town stood a house that had been abandoned for over a century. It was a crumbling relic of a bygone era, its windows shattered, its roof sagging under the weight of time, and its walls covered in ivy that seemed to cling to it like a desperate lover. The locals called it the Hollow House, and it was said to be cursed. No one dared to go near it, let alone step inside. But I, foolishly, was different. I was drawn to it, not out of bravery, but out of a morbid curiosity that I couldn't shake. The air was dense, almost thick enough to taste, and the silence was suffocating. It was as though the very forest was holding its breath, watching me. At first, I told myself it was just nerves, nothing more. But as I ventured deeper, I began to feel the weight of something unseen, something lurking in the shadows. The path seemed to shift, winding in directions I hadn't remembered taking. I had heard about the strange occurrences that plagued those who entered this place, but I dismissed them as simple misdirection or stories meant to deter the curious. As the hours passed, the forest grew more oppressive. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their gnarled limbs hanging lower, as if blocking the light from above. An overwhelming sense of unease gnawed at my gut, but I pushed forward, determined to find whatever secrets the strange land held. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something ancient, and that the very land itself knew I didn't belong. And then, I saw it. Nestled among the roots of an ancient oak, half buried in the earth, was a stone. At first glance it appeared to be just a rock, weathered and worn by time. But as I drew closer, I could feel something, an energy radiating from it. The stone seemed to pulse, a faint glow flickering beneath its surface, as if alive. I reached out with trembling hands, drawn to it in a way I couldn't explain. The moment my fingers made contact, a surge of visions flooded my mind. I staggered backward, gasping for air, as the images twisted through my mind like a torrent of nightmares. Ancient civilizations appeared before me, their faces gaunt and hollow, their eyes wide with terror as they chanted around a fire. They were worshipping the stone, performing dark rituals in its name, offering sacrifices to whatever malevolent entity it contained. I saw visions of cities burning, of skies torn apart by violent storms, and of the earth itself cracking open to swallow everything in its path. The visions became clearer, more vivid, as though I was seeing the future, or something that had always been waiting to happen. In the depths of my mind, I understood the terrible truth. The stone was not just an artifact. It was a key to something far worse than I could have imagined, a key to the gates of hell itself. I pulled my hand away, stumbling backward in horror. My heart raced, my breath came in ragged gasps, and a cold sweat slicked my skin. The visions faded, but the sense of dread lingered, heavy and suffocating. The stone pulsed one last time, as if calling to me, beckoning me back into its embrace. I turned to flee, to escape the forest and the nightmare that had just unfolded before me. But as I ran, I could feel the land shifting, the trees closing in around me. The path I had taken was no longer there, replaced by endless twists and turns, as if the forest itself was toying with me. The silence was broken by whispers, soft at first, barely audible, but growing louder, more insistent. The voices were not human. They were ancient, echoing through the trees like a forgotten language. The forest seemed alive, its every movement deliberate, as if it were hunting me. And then, everything went black. The awakening. When I finally regained consciousness, I found myself lying in my own bed, the familiar surroundings of my apartment feeling like a distant dream. The memories of the strange land, the stone, and the visions still lingered in my mind like a waking nightmare. I sat up, heart pounding, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion or some hidden fear? I couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it, but deep down, I knew it was real. I had felt the stone's power, and it had left an indelible mark on me. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't concentrate on my work, couldn't focus on anything but the stone. It haunted my every thought. The visions had been so vivid, so real. How could I simply ignore them? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had only scratched the surface of something far darker, far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. And then, one day, I found it. A small package arrived at my door, wrapped in brown paper with no return address. I almost didn't open it, convinced it was some cruel prank, but my hands trembled as I tore away the paper, revealing an ornate wooden box. It was intricately carved, with a symbol etched into its lid. One that I recognized immediately, the same symbol that had been etched onto the stone in the forest. I opened the box, my breath catching in my throat. Inside, nestled in dark velvet, was the stone, the very same one. The glow was faint, but it pulsed with an otherworldly energy, as if calling to me, beckoning me closer. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, the same pull, the same dark compulsion that had driven me to touch it in the forest. I knew in that moment that I was no longer in control. The stone had found me again. In the depths of rural darkness, where the shadows danced like demons and the wind whispered secrets to the trees, there existed a terror beyond comprehension. It was a terror that wore the face of an old woman, but was driven by a malevolent force that defied the laws of nature. This was the story of a horror that would test the faith of a holy man and push him to the very limits of human endurance. In the small village of Ashwood, a sense of unease settled over the residents like a shroud. It began with small, seemingly insignificant events, a missing chicken here, a broken vase there. But as the days passed, the occurrences grew more frequent and more disturbing. Tools would go missing, only to reappear in strange places. Food would spoil, as if something had breathed its foul breath upon it. And then, the villagers began to vanish. At first, no one suspected the old woman who lived on the outskirts of the village. She was a recluse, rarely seen or heard from. But as the disappearances continued, the villagers began to whisper among themselves. They spoke of strange noises coming from the old woman's hut, of lights flickering in the dead of night. It was then that the holy man, Father Michael, decided to investigate. He had heard the rumors, but he did not believe them. He knew that the old woman was a kind soul who had lived a life of quiet devotion. But as he approached the old woman's hut, he felt a sense of unease. The air seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening into dark, malevolent pools. He knocked on the door, and when it creaked open, he was met with a sight that made his blood run cold. The old woman stood before him, her eyes black as coal, her skin twisted into a grotesque grimace. She was no longer human, but a vessel for some ancient, malevolent power. Father Michael knew that he had to act quickly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small vial of holy water. He tossed it at the old woman, but she did not flinch. Instead, she began to laugh. a sound that was like nothing Father Michael had ever heard before. It was a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of hell. Father Michael knew that he had to think fast. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was a book of prayers, one that he had used to ward off evil spirits before. He began to read from the book, his voice steady and strong. The words seemed to wash over the old woman, causing her to recoil in agony. She stumbled backward, her eyes flashing with anger, but Father Michael did not stop. He continued to read from the book, his voice growing louder and more confident. The old woman stumbled and fell, her body contorting into impossible positions. And then, she was still. Father Michael approached her cautiously, his heart still pounding with fear. He reached out and touched her forehead, and as he did, he felt a surge of energy flow through him. The old woman's eyes flickered open, and for a moment, Father Michael saw the person she once was. He saw a kind soul, a woman who had been consumed by a malevolent power. And then, she was gone. Father Michael stood up, his body weary but his spirit renewed. He knew that he had fought a great battle, one that had tested his faith and his courage, and he had emerged victorious. The villagers were never bothered again by the old woman's malevolent presence. They lived in peace, knowing that Father Michael had saved them from a horror beyond comprehension. But Father Michael knew that the battle was far from over. He knew that there were still forces of darkness lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike, and he was ready. Titled The Abandoned House, 100 Years of Silence. I've always been the curious type, the kind who can't resist investigating old, abandoned places. So, when I stumbled upon an old thread on Reddit, my interest was piqued. The thread was titled, "Has anyone ever heard of the old house on Bellamy Street?" The post was written by an anonymous user who claimed to have lived near the house and experienced strange things. Of course, I had to dig deeper. The house on Bellamy Street had been abandoned for over a century. It was a large, looming structure covered in ivy, its windows boarded up. The locals whispered about the house for years, how it had once belonged to the wealthy Montague family, known for their eccentricities and bizarre behavior. But then, one night, something happened. The family simply vanished. No one ever found out what happened to them, but people said the house was cursed. According to the Reddit post, the last time anyone had seen anyone from the Montague family was at a grand dinner party they hosted. No one at that party ever spoke of what they had seen. Those who did were found rambling incoherently days later, their minds shattered. After that night, the house had stood empty, though there were always rumors of lights flickering behind the windows and faint sounds of music or laughter echoing through the streets at night. I had to see the house for myself. One crisp autumn evening, I decided to check it out. I wasn't planning on going inside. I'd read enough horror stories online to know better, but I figured I could snap a few photos from the outside. As I approached the house, the air grew colder, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. It was as if the house itself was alive, watching me. The trees surrounding it were twisted and gnarled, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. The house loomed above me, dark and silent, except for the occasional creak of wood, as if the house was settling. The windows were dark, like hollow eyes staring out into the void. I took a few steps closer, my breath visible in the cold air, and I noticed something strange. There was a faint flicker of light behind one of the upstairs windows. At first I thought it was just a reflection, maybe from a passing car, but no car had driven by in the last hour. The light flickered again, as if beckoning me. I found myself walking closer to the front door before I even realized what I was doing. The gate was rusted, and the gravel crunched beneath my feet, a sound that seemed to echo too loudly in the otherwise silent night. I reached for the doorknob, and to my surprise, it turned easily in my hand. The door creaked open, revealing the darkness inside. As I stepped inside, I was hit with the overwhelming smell of mildew and decay. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and the air felt thick, almost suffocating. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should turn back, but curiosity pushed me forward. The house was freezing, colder than it should have been for such a mild evening. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and began to explore. The grand staircase that led to the second floor was worn but still sturdy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me as I ascended, but every time I turned around, there was nothing. The walls were adorned with faded portraits of the Montague family, their eyes following me as I moved through the house. The unsettling feeling grew stronger with every step. I made my way down a long hallway, past rooms that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. Old furniture lay covered in dust, and the remnants of luxurious wallpaper hung in tatters. The silence was deafening, but then I heard it. Soft, barely perceptible at first, a faint whisper. I froze, straining to listen. The whisper grew louder, clearer. It sounded like a woman's voice, but I couldn't make out the words. The voice seemed to come from the end of the hallway, from a room that was slightly ajar. My heart raced as I approached the door, my hand trembling as I pushed it open. Inside, the room was dark, save for a single candle flickering on a small table in the center. The walls were lined with strange symbols, etched into the wood like they had been scratched by something desperate. The air felt heavy in here, thick with the weight of something unseen. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the room. When I saw it, on the wall opposite me hung a large, ornate mirror. It was cracked, with jagged lines running through the glass. But what caught my attention wasn't the damage. It was the reflection. In the mirror, I saw a woman standing behind me, dressed in an old-fashioned gown. Her hair was dark, her face pale, and her eyes. Those eyes. They were empty, hollow, like a void that was staring into my very soul. I spun around, heart pounding, but no one was there. I was alone. I took a step back, trying to shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. That's when I noticed something else. On the table, beneath the candle, was a small, old-fashioned book. It was open, as though someone had been reading it recently. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and as I touched the pages, a cold, sharp pain shot through my hand. I yanked it back, but the damage was already done. The air around me seemed to warp, growing heavier, colder. The whispering voice returned, louder now, frantic. It was no longer a woman's voice, but something deeper, something darker. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel the anger, the torment in the sound. And then, the ground beneath me trembled. I looked down, panic rising in my chest as the floor began to crack, as if something was trying to break through. A low, guttural sound rumbled from beneath, and I could feel the house itself shifting, like it was alive, writhing in pain. The whispers grew louder, and I heard something, or someone, moving behind me. I didn't wait to see what it was. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath, my legs shaking. The front door slammed behind me with a deafening bang, as if something had been released from inside. I looked back at the house, heart pounding in my chest, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. The windows that had been dark were now illuminated from within, the faint glow of candlelight flickering in every room. But the most horrifying thing was the figure standing in one of the windows. A man, pale, his face twisted in an agonized scream. He reached for me, but as I took a step back, he vanished, disappearing into the shadows. I never returned to Bellamy Street after that night. Weeks later, I came across another Reddit post, written by a user named Lost Historian. It was a long, detailed post about the history of the Montague family and the house on Bellamy Street. According to the post, the Montagues had been involved in occult practices, dark rituals meant to open doors to the afterlife. The night they disappeared, they had been attempting to summon something from beyond, something ancient, something that should never have been released. The post ended with a chilling line. The house is still there, and whatever they summoned, it's still waiting. I haven't slept right since that night. Every now and then, when I'm alone, I can hear whispers in the dark. And when I close my eyes, I see those empty, hollow eyes staring back at me. I don't know if I'll ever be free from the house on Bellamy Street. And I don't think I want to know what's still hiding in the shadows.